Okay, everyone. So today we're going to be responding to a video on TikTok that I came across, and it's specifically this Singaporean man whom, I mean, I've never seen Singaporeans talk about the logical problem of evil with such, with such, with such indignation, right? Most of the time, I come across videos like this. It's American people, it's British people, it's basically Westerners who grapple with the problem, who talk about the Epicurean Paradox, but this is my first time seeing it arise from a Singaporean man. So that's really interesting. I want to address it, right? Not just because it's the problem of evil, it's the logical problem of evil, the Epicurean Paradox, but also because it's coming from a Singaporean man, a country that I'm from, right? So maybe I could relate to him a little bit more, maybe give a persuasive response. But I'm just going to be going through a few talking points today on why what he said is like false. And yeah, that's about it. And also some counter objections that perhaps we could think about.
Cannot exist. All right, let me repeat myself because I did not say he does not exist. Although that would be true as well, he physically cannot exist.
Okay, so physically cannot exist. I mean, I'm not going to criticize that, but it he's committing himself. He doesn't know this, but he's committing himself to a very large burden of proof. He has to show, if he says physically cannot exist, he has to show the impossibility of the claim rather than just treading on ignorance, right? He has to show that definitely God cannot exist in every possible world. Not just modally in modal logic, but yeah.
Within the parameters that you've set in your scriptures. Now, this God comes in many forms and depictions. Evil
And also parameters that we set in our scriptures. I mean, that's assuming that you get those parameters right, right? So you have to list down those parameters and show how there's an internal criticism that follows.
when we narrow it down to just Abrahamic religions. Christianity has almost 50,000 denominations by itself. The exact descriptions of God and what he's capable of doing vary from religion to religion, but there are always non-negotiables when it comes to God. Regardless of what you believe in, God is always described as an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent being. But that description itself already begins to form contradictions.
So the Epicurean Paradox. Yeah, pretty interesting coming from a Singaporean person. My first time hearing this.
For instance, if a lady was assaulted and mugged with no one other than the assailant around to intervene, does God step in? No, he doesn't. He lets it happen. So the question is why? Why does he not step in? Why does he not help the people that he so desperately wants to save? Maybe he didn't know about it, right?
Wait, but this is assuming that he does not have a morally justified reason for allowing the old lady to get mugged. Like the old lady could have been mugged. God could have allowed the old lady to get mugged because had she not been mugged, she would have just like walked right into a traffic light without looking at the headlights, and then a car would have just crashed right into her. But then luckily she got mugged at that exact moment, right before she was gonna walk onto the road, and she got saved by the car. Right? How do you know God didn't permit that circumstance? And I know you could like narrow the scope down to a very specific circumstance where it seems improbable that she's in any danger, but I will always be able to find all kinds of possibilities. And the fact is, at the beginning, he already committed himself to a claim of impossibility, right? Which is a huge burden of proof. It's very easy to refute. I just have to show the possibility of the contrary, that some contrary view is possible, and and his argument fails. His analogy fails.
Then he's not omniscient. Or maybe he knew about it, but just couldn't do anything. Then he's not omnipotent. Or maybe he knew about it and had all the power to stop it, but just didn't feel like it. Then he's not omnibenevolent.
Right. So this is a false trichotomy. It doesn't even follow the law of excluded middle. Uh, if he wants, and this actually, yeah, but if he wants to make it a impossibility claim, he has to add more parameters. He has to include his own parameters that weren't there in the previous argument. So he has to introduce new propositions to show that it's a contradiction.
I can humor you in saying that God is this and God is that, but he physically cannot have all of these three traits at once because the long list of unnecessary suffering in the world deems it so.
Yeah, and then so he just added something. He just included something in there. He included omnibenevolence and unnecessary suffering, and he said that there's that this specific analogy is a case of unnecessary suffering. I assume that he's referring to his previous analogy as a case of unnecessary suffering. So that's an additional proposition that he has to defend. He has to defend that an old lady getting mugged is a case of unnecessary suffering. Like, um, no, no disagreements. There's no other reason to think otherwise. That's a huge burden. You cannot prove me that. That you can't like mathematically show me that, right? That's such a huge burden. That's an absurd burden. But he doesn't know this, so we're gonna let it slide.
A common thing that theists bring up in rebuttal to this is the idea of free will, right? God chooses not to interfere because that would be effectively taking away humanity's right to choice.
I mean, I think there's a gross misunderstanding of free will because there are theistic systems like the Catholic Church, which affirm free will. Don't get me wrong, but they don't use free will as the reason behind suffering. There's greater good theodicy, for example, which is proposed by uh, the Doctor of Grace, Augustine, who was a thinker in the early first millennia of the church, who said that God actually allows evils in order to bring about some greater good. Right? You can go search this up yourself, greater good theodicy in your free time.
Now, me personally, I don't believe that we have free will, especially not if you're a theist. But even if free will did exist, my point still stands. Because I'm not here to discuss specific atrocities, I'm talking about the idea of unnecessary suffering. Now, to make my point even clearer, let me change the scenario.
Right. So he said free will, but I have the free will defense pulled up right here, which is a more rigorous version of the free will count objection. And basically, what it says that is that God could have some morally justified reason for permitting the existence of evil, and human free will is a credible offsetting justification. But I get that he's getting to. Uh, I'll just let him finish. But I get that you can already read the captions. I get that he's getting to natural evils, right? But this still falls underneath greater good theodicy, which can be justified. And if for any sort of reason people find this analogy compelling towards the atheist side, it's because it's an appeal to emotion, right?
A newborn baby is choking on its own saliva in its sleep. The mom and dad are in the house, but they're sleeping as well, and there are nobody else to intervene and help this baby. God choosing to step in this scenario does not take away anyone's right to choice. The baby did not choose to choke. It has no concept of any of that. Even if God were to come in physical form and pull the saliva out of the baby's mouth, nothing would change. But what do we actually observe in real life? Historically speaking, God would let that baby die 100 times out of 100 times.
Right, so he's exaggerating it once more. Like historically speaking, the Catholic Church has many miracles, many historical miracles. Now, obviously, those are very contested. You can go do that yourself. Do some research into that yourself. But he also talks about natural evils. I mean, God could have a morally justified reason for letting a deer, for allowing unnecessary animal suffering. Right, suffering that is seemingly unnecessary doesn't mean that it's actually unnecessary. Like I said, he committed himself to a very big burden at the start, so he has to show that it's impossible for this for permitting this evil, right? Outside of just appealing to emotion. And you could like call me or a theistic person who's defending the proposition that God has some morally justified reason for allowing this really, really gratuitous evil, a really, really seemingly gratuitous evil. You could like call us like, oh, you're such an evil person. How can you say someone can be justified in doing this? But you're presupposing, like, that there's this huge, big atrocity out there that warrants me getting called out, right? That is not just relative, right? And I think you can see where I'm treading on here, right? You're like trying to get objective evils without having that whole God conundrum to it. It's a bit inconsistent and it's a bit arbitrary.
So what makes more sense? Your perfect, mighty God allowing an innocent baby to choke and die in its sleep to prove a point, or that he simply cannot exist?
Well, I wouldn't say he needs to prove a point. He just needs to act in according to his nature. Uh, and like proving a point is what you're doing right now, right? And you're presuppose that he has to be proving a point when he could just be allowing it for some morally justified reason. And you didn't specify what that point was either. I mean, you could have listed some examples, but like I see videos like these every single day. I just hope maybe we could have a talk, right? This guy could invite me over to speak. Why not? Let's have a chat. But really, really interesting seeing this from a Singaporean man. But that's about it today. This is a rather short video, 11 minutes. Well, I wanted to keep it way shorter. But yeah, this guy has a big burden of proof. I'm gonna be charitable. He knows the Epicurean Paradox. I'm not gonna say he doesn't know what he's talking about because I'm just gonna say that I'm gonna be really, really extra nice and say that he needs to investigate more into objections, contra objections. Maybe then he could make his arguments more sound and more compelling, more valid. But yeah, that's about it, guys. Peace.